The Berlin lorry attacker is still on the run tonight after police released the man they were holding. As the scene of the carnage is cleared, the German authorities have admitted the man they arrested nearby was not involved and warned the missing driver poses a grave threat. Chancellor Merkel insists the country should not be paralysed by terror.
We must, as things stand now, assume it was a terrorist attack. I know it would be especially hard for us all to bear if it were confirmed that the person who committed this act was someone who sought protection and asylum in Germany.
Also tonight, scaling back her work, the Queen steps down as patron of 25 organisations.
Revolutionary new treatment for prostate cancer that cured 50% of patients.
And the First Lady meets the Queen of TV. Michelle tells Oprah why she'll never run for president.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale and James Mates.
Good evening. The suspected terrorist who drove a lorry into crowds of people at a Christmas market in Berlin is still on the loose tonight and may be armed. German authorities initially thought a Pakistani man arrested nearby was the driver of the vehicle, but in the past few minutes he has been released.
12 people are now confirmed to have died in the attack and dozens more remain in hospital, many of them critically ill. German Chancellor Angela Merkel visited the scene and said it would be particularly difficult to bear if the attacker turned out to be a refugee. Our security editor Rohit Kachru is in Berlin tonight. Rohit.
Well, James, if there was one source of comfort for Germans last night digesting this agonising news, it was that this investigation seemed like it would be rapid. A suspect, the driver of the lorry, it was said, had been arrested. Well, it now appears that he has been released, but due to a series of false assumptions and misunderstandings, he was arrested in the first place. And now, even worse, it seems that the real driver, the real suspected terrorist, might now be on the loose. The 25-ton weapon that caused carnage with devastating simplicity. The decorations it toppled still caught in the windscreen. But after the lorry was removed today, the crime scene cleared, investigators had to start all over again, as from the rubble came the haze. Last night things seemed clearer, as the suspect presumed to be the driver was detained. The lorry from Poland, a refugee from Pakistan, perhaps inspired from Syria. But the assumptions made public by German police might have been wrong. Although prosecutors said they still assume it was an act of terrorism, there was a disclaimer. We have to possibly get used to the thought that the person detained yesterday, who is a Pakistani national who has been preliminarily detained yesterday as a suspect, may not have been the perpetrator or belong to the group of perpetrators. Earlier, in pursuit of more details about their suspect, special forces raided a refugee centre, an airport of the Nazi era, now a symbol of the Merkel era. One refugee told me he recognized the suspect but thought nothing. But by then, Chancellor Angela Merkel had already tried to set the tone, prepared for a backlash against her policy towards refugees.
I know it would be especially hard for us all to bear if it were confirmed that the person who committed this act was someone who sought protection and asylum in Germany.
She then went to the scene of the attack, where she laid flowers at the spot where victims were killed, and where today those who survived shared their stories.
Sad. We're
yeah.
alive and we feel sorry for the people that aren't, but just if my daughter hadn't have stopped us, things could have been a bit
worse.
different.
For us,
You know, so we consider ourselves very lucky.
Investigators cannot afford to be so reflective as they try to establish who it was who hijacked this vehicle from its Polish driver. The lorry company said its last contact was made around 3 p.m. yesterday. GPS data shows the truck's engine was started 3 separate times later in the day, as if someone was practicing how to drive before it drove off at 7:34 p.m. Then, shortly after 8 p.m, the lorry was driven along Kantstrasse into the festive market beside the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church. The impact is unbearable, and it's compounded by uncertainty. Some of the conclusions made about this tragedy still stand, but almost 24 hours on, there is a lot we don't know. Rohit Katru, ITV News, Berlin.
Bells tolled at the scene tonight to mark the start of a vigil for those killed and injured in the attack. Across the capital, there were many other tributes with church services and condolence books. And the famous Brandenburg Gate, Berlin's symbol of peace and unity, has been lit up in the colours of the German flag. Sally Lockwood reports on how the city has reacted.
A vigil after the violence. A regrettably familiar routine after another atrocity on European soil. Angela Merkel tonight joining the city's residents for a church service just yards from last night's horror.
So what are we fighting for?
One man who'd missed the attack by just moments, returning to pay his respects.
It was shocking because we're visiting here. We come from Hamburg for 2 days, and half an hour before we passed, after it crashed.
Outside, people gathered in solidarity, the city in shock, sickened by the loss of life, and many shaken by what they feel is an attack on their liberal way of life.
I grew up in Berlin. I love Berlin, it's my city. I love the people here. We're like one big family, so I'm really sad about this.
Inside, a book of condolence gives residents and tourists a place to pay their respects, while the hashtag Ich bin ein Berliner, I am a Berliner, is how people around the world are expressing their solidarity. Berliners are now seeking strength in the company of each other. The festive spirit radically dimmed tonight, but defiant. Defiance, their only weapon to fight their fear.
I'm afraid we've lost the signal to Sally Lockwood there. We will try and return to her a little bit later. But in the meantime, let's go back to our security editor, Rohit Katru, who is in Berlin. Now, Rohit, authorities are under clearly increasing pressure to find those responsible tonight.
Yes, they are being asked very serious questions by ordinary Germans about what went wrong. But here's perhaps the real problem for investigators. They may well have lost those crucial opening golden hours of their investigation. Last night, everyone in this area should have been reviewing precisely what they saw, what they heard, what they thought in the hours leading up to this. Perhaps they had a clue that might have been a crucial detail, but those had been lost, and now the resources of the entire German intelligence and security system is now devoted to finding the real attacker behind this.
OK, Rohit Katru in Berlin, thank you.
Here, the government said there were no plans to raise the UK's security level, but some police forces are taking extra measures.
Yes, Scotland Yard said it's reviewing protection around public events, and in Greater Manchester there's an increased police presence at its many Christmas markets. Damon Green reports on the UK response.
It's an attraction that draws millions every year and is known as one of the biggest and best of its kind in Europe. Manchester's Christmas market, today with an increased security presence, a city which has itself suffered at the hands of terrorists, taking nothing for granted.
Cities around the world are our partners. They're the people that we work with, and it's horrific to see what has happened. But also, we know that we can, as far as is possible, ensure that we don't have that happening here. We can get on with our business in this city.
Festive markets like this one in Nottingham are filled with shoppers in the days before Christmas. Protecting them without making them feel uneasy is something British authorities have long been used to. This barrier at Birmingham's German market is designed with a specific purpose: to prevent entry to vehicles with no business there. Others are clad in wood to avoid putting off visitors.
Restricting access, stopping vehicular access, bag searches maybe. The more that we increase these things, the more we move away from our traditional Western values of openness and freedom. So it's a hard balance to strike.
London has long been used to the idea that anything can be considered a target by those wanting to spread fear. But other cities like Sheffield are now taking precautions of their own. Police at the Christmas market, a reality of life in the 21st century. Here in Manchester, people accept that and say it won't stop them living their lives.
We live in an age where there's individuals who want to do silly things, and I think if we stop coming out and embracing this, we're letting them win.
The fact of it all is you can't keep looking behind you all the time, can you? You can't. You know, you've got to live your life and get on with it.
Tonight they're celebrating Christmas, but remembering the people of Berlin, a city whose suffering won't be ignored or forgotten.
Well, this market is full tonight, people having a good time, and many of those here tonight remember when the IRA bombed this city 20 years ago. The answer to people who want to create fear and stir up hatred is the same now as it was then. Be vigilant, but be happy and live your life.
Damon, thank you.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News, the Queen steps down from some of her patronages to ease her workload.
And when Oprah met Obama, the First Lady on life after the White House. Those stories and more after this break. Welcome back. There was plenty for the royal family to discuss at the Queen's annual Christmas lunch today, because earlier she had announced she's to start reining in her workload, stepping down from 25 organisations. And as our royal editor Tim Ewart reports, it's being seen as a common sense approach to her advancing years.
The Queen was at Buckingham Palace today, hosting the annual Christmas lunch there for her family. As William, Harry and Kate arrived with Prince George, she let it be known that they'll be taking on more royal responsibilities. At the end of a year in which she celebrated her 90th birthday, the Queen has relinquished her patronage of 25 organisations, a small part of the 600 patronages she holds, but nevertheless a significant reduction in her workload. It was described as a gradual shift in management rather than a big bang change.
Palace officials are keen to stress that there remains just one boss here. The Queen, they say, is absolutely still in charge.
Nearly 70 years ago, the then Princess Elizabeth made it clear she regarded being monarch as a job for life.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service.
The patronages she'll relinquish include the All England Lawn Tennis Club. The Duchess of Cambridge, much more enthusiastic about Wimbledon, will take over. And the Queen will no longer be patron of the Battersea Dogs Home. A replacement will be named shortly. But today the talk was all about that most celebrated royal dog lover.
The Queen, 60 years, has really made us, I think, who we are, and we've been terribly, terribly grateful to her.
There is change in the air, gradual, but change nevertheless. Tim Ewart, ITV News.
Scotland's leader, Nicola Sturgeon, outlined her own Brexit plan to Theresa May today. The First Minister said she wants her country to remain in the single market, even if the rest of the UK leaves. And if that doesn't happen, she warns a second independence referendum becomes more likely, as our political correspondent Carl Dinnan reports.
Nicola Sturgeon has in her hand something no one else seems to have. It's a plan for Brexit, even though she still wants to stay in the EU.
Brexit is a problem not of Scotland's making.
She wants Scotland's relationship with the EU to look more like Norway's. Norway is in the single market, which allows free movement of goods, services and labour. But it's not in the European Customs Union, which also sets common trade tariffs with the rest of the world. Mrs Sturgeon thinks her plan can maintain much of Scotland's relationships with both the EU and the UK.
This option does not prioritise membership of the EU single market over continued free trade across the UK. It would safeguard both.
The deal Mrs Sturgeon's proposed would see Scotland staying in the single market if the UK leaves it. But if the UK also leaves the customs union, then Scotland would leave that too, thus allowing Scotland to keep its borders with the rest of the UK open. The Prime Minister said she'd look at the plan, but in the end told MPs she doesn't want Scotland to have a different deal.
What we will be negotiating is a United Kingdom approach and a United Kingdom relationship with the European Union. I think you've assumed an acceptance of differential relationships, which I don't think it's right to accept.
But if Number 10 does reject the Scottish proposals, Mrs Sturgeon reserves the right to call for another independence referendum. And this evening that looks a little bit more likely to be another consequence of Brexit. Carl Dinnan, ITV News, Downing Street.
A stunt show boss who organised an event in which a human cannonball died has been given community service and fined £100,000. 24-year-old Matt Cranch was killed when a safety net collapsed after he was fired into the air during the 2011 event in Kent. In court, the show organiser Scott May admitted failing to ensure the safety of his workers.
And a 48-hour strike by airport staff planned for the 23rd and 24th of December has been cancelled. The Unite Union says successful pay talks have prevented the walkout by baggage handlers and check-in staff.
A new laser therapy for prostate cancer has been hailed as a leap forward after it left half of patients disease-free. Clinical trials in early stages of cancer have shown promising results with none of the side effects of traditional methods. Our science correspondent Alok Jar is here. Alok, this sounds fantastic. How does it work?
Well, this is actually a drug derived from a bacterium that normally lives in the deep sea. And what it does is actually kills prostate cancer cells and leaves healthy cells intact. So more than 46,000 people every year are diagnosed with prostate cancer and around 11,000 die. Now, the treatment options are usually leave it alone or have drastic surgery and radiotherapy, and the latter can have very serious side effects. So in this new therapy, what they do is to inject the drug into the bloodstream, but it stays inactive until it is exposed to light, and then it becomes toxic. So what they do is they insert optical fibres into the tumour in the prostate, then fire lasers into them. The laser light activates the drug, which then, as I said, kills the cancer cells while leaving the healthy prostate cells behind. Now, because it only targets the unhealthy cells, it doesn't cause long-term damage. In this trial, half the patients went into remission, and after a few months, the sort of side effects had tailed away. The caution is that this is not going to be applicable to every single patient with prostate cancer. Some will still need that drastic surgery and radiotherapy. Others, it's best to leave it alone and not have the intervention. And the NHS will look into this next year to see whether it's safe enough to use in a more general way. So it's not available quite yet.
Alok, sounds fantastic. Thank you very much indeed.
And finally, Michelle Obama has dashed the hopes of some that she might one day run for president herself. In a candid interview with Oprah Winfrey, the First Lady said it would place too much of a strain on her family.
She also spoke of the bitter election campaign and said it was challenging to watch and experience. But she insisted her door would always be open to the next First Lady, Melania Trump. As our Washington correspondent Robert Moore reports.
Well, welcome to my home. Thanks for having me. For Michelle Obama, this is the bittersweet end to her role as America's First Lady. Widely respected at home and abroad, this was her in Britain last year. She can now look forward to life without the relentless scrutiny. But she doesn't hide her deep disappointment about the election result, for she was emotionally invested in Hillary Clinton preserving her husband's legacy.
We feel the difference now. Yeah. See, now we're feeling what not having hope feels like, you know. Hope is necessary. It's a necessary concept.
But will Michelle, like Hillary, now enter the political arena herself? With her answer to Oprah Winfrey came a warning to the Trump family.
Would you ever run for office? No, I have to ask it. No. I wouldn't do that to my kids. Yeah. Because what people don't understand is that you run, their lives stop at any age. I mean, the next family that comes in here, every person in that family, every child, every grandchild, their lives will be turned upside down in a way that no American really understands.
In exactly a month, Michelle, the great-great-granddaughter of slaves, will leave the stage. And in her place will step forward Melania Trump, the former supermodel from Slovenia. Two successive First Ladies from vastly different backgrounds. Robert Moore, ITV News, Washington.
A reminder before we go of our main headline this evening, and the only suspect held after the lorry attack on Berlin's Christmas market has been released by German police.
Tom Bradby will be here later with more on that story in News at 10.
But from all the team here on the Evening News, have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.